So I just saw Star Trek last night, and I decided to give myself a little bit of space before I started a review because Star Trek is something very, very precious to me. It's something very important in my life, particularly. Oh, gosh darn it. People stop trying to IM me when I'm talking about my Star Trek. If you heard that little ping thing in the background, that was somebody trying to IM me. A special friend of mine, but Star Trek is something very important to me. And I tend to notice that when I watch films that are nostalgic, that play on my nostalgia, I tend to overdo my initial reviews of them. It just tends to be a giant rant about how, oh my god, they made a reference to this, or oh my god, they made a reference to that, hence this movie is made of epic win, before I begin to actually really let the movie sink in. Because what's so unfortunate about reviewing a film, like right after you've seen it, is that I think the power of cinema isn't necessarily this feeling that you get while you're in the theater, even though that's an important part of it, but more the memories that you retain right after having seen the film. I saw Star Trek Thursday night, 7 o'clock showing. First showing in the theater. Great freaking movie. I mean it. It was by far the best Star Trek film ever made. Better than Wrath of Khan. Better than Search for Spock. Better than all of those films. Certainly light years ahead of anything that the Next Generation produced. This is a Star Trek film to be celebrated about. This is a Star Trek film to be remembered. I'll go into detail why that is, but this is a film that, while it's very nostalgic, and while it builds on people's emotions that had been set in from the original series, it's also a movie that has been designed specifically for other audiences as well. It doesn't leave you out of the loop. You understand. Anybody, if you're paying attention to this film, will understand what's going on. I'm not going to give away any spoilers, but there is a slight plot twist that I know threw some people for a loop, but just go along with it, and I'm sure the whole thing is everybody knows who Spock is. Even if you haven't seen the original series, everybody knows who Kirk is, and they know their different character quirks through pop culture, not subculture, but and this film builds on the characters. Well, it isn't reverent to Star Trek's look. I would say this film looks completely different from any Star Trek film or any Star Trek series ever made. There's some visual cues, such as the uniforms. Uniforms basically look the same as they did in the original series. The Enterprise looks like a souped-up, really, really amazing-looking CGI version of what had also been seen, back in the 1960s. But overall, this film is a completely different Star Trek. It is not, as the commercials and the advertisements have been stating, this ain't your daddy's Star Trek, which is, I personally thought was completely ridiculous. But it took a while to get used to this more modern look. I'm so used to kind of just seeing William Shatner stand in the middle of a room looking stupid, like going, Scotty, fire the phasers. And it looks like somebody's living room with really cheap chairs and everything. That's what I grew up with. That's what I fell in love with. So it's hard accepting something different. But then after a while, about, I would say 30, 45 minutes into the movie, I adjusted to it and I began to realize that what J.J. Abrams has done here is he took something good and is making it better by making it accessible. Star Trek had become so overrun with jargon and with in-jokes and little winks and nods to the fans that it forgot to be something for everybody, which was what Gene Roddenberry's original Star Trek was. Everybody loved Star Trek back in the 70s. Everybody will love this Star Trek. Not everybody. Everybody is entitled to their own opinion, and I'm sure there's probably somebody who hates this film for whatever reason that may be, but this is an accessible, fun, sci-fi popcorn film. The tone isn't exactly on note with the original Star Trek, but I'll tell you what, the characters are, and that's all that really matters. These characters feel like the original characters, and you know what? I actually like this cast better than I like the original cast. I like Kirk better. I like Carl Urban as McCoy. I don't like him better than the original McCoy, but I like him as much. The rest of the cast, with the exception of Sulu, I like just as much as I like the original cast. And since Chris Pine as Kirk is so much better than the Shatner Kirk, no offense to any Shatner fans out there, I understand that he has his own little cult following for whatever the hell reason. I personally think he's a horrible actor, but Chris Pine delivers that sort of swagger, that sort of playboy charm that, to me, I couldn't buy in Shatner. Shatner is a terrible actor. That's my personal opinion. I've seen him in other things. I don't buy him. He's a smug. I'm going to stop doing this because this is going to become a Shatner rant. That's a completely different video altogether. This film, the action sequences are intense. They're exciting. They're exhilarating. The story, while simplistic, I actually admired the fact that it didn't get bogged down in a whole bunch of pseudo-philosophy. Star Trek at its best is intellectual. This film is not necessarily intellectual. It's more emotional. But I'm willing to forgive that because the characters are so strong. This is an origin story. And in an origin story, I admire the fact that they didn't let the philosophy that gets injected into every single Star Trek movie bog it down. No, they basically said, we're going to introduce these characters, the soul of each of these characters. We're going to introduce them in a way that's fresh and exciting and funny and interesting. And we're going to throw in enough references to the original source material and the spirit, the main essence of the source material. It may not be spot on, but that's the whole thing that's great about a reboot or a sequel. This is kind of a half reboot, half sequel. You'll understand when you see the film. I can't explain it here without ruining like the entire plot. But this is true to the spirit of Gene Roddenberry's Star Trek. It is. It has the essence of what made that work, and it actually makes it better. This is the best singular Star Trek anything I think I've ever seen. I would go so far as to say best episode ever. I haven't seen every single Star Trek episode ever, but this is by far the thing that was related to Star Trek that I've been most impressed by since Wrath of Khan. And I personally think this is a more entertaining film than Wrath of Khan. Wrath of Khan made me cry. This one didn't, but I was a hell of a lot more entertained during this movie. There's been a lot said about, how this film violates the original spirit of Gene Roddenberry's Star Trek through the action sequences. I personally say that there's enough character development. There's enough. The script to this film is tight. It's focused. It blasts through the 2 hours. So you're sitting there by the end of this thing, and you don't want it. It's kind of sad to see it over. You want to sit down and watch the movie again right after you leave the theater. There's the ending to this film is so incredible. Is so just amazingly fun, nostalgic. This movie will convert a lot of people to Star Trek, I think, because it's giving them what Star Trek is in the most accessible way possible. And after they see this, a new generation is going to come in loving these characters. And they're going to want to see more of these characters. And it won't matter if William Shatner is playing Kirk. It won't matter if Leonard Nimoy is playing Spock. It won't matter that it was corny and cheesy back then. They'll want to watch it because they love the characters. These are essentially the same characters from the original series, just slightly modernized. And that's the real beauty of this film. It's modern while not forgetting that it's a Star Trek film. The action is a bit more Star Wars, but it makes it a lot more fun because of that. This has Gotta Love Breath, and if I had to give this a rating, I'm debating between a 4 and a 4.5. I'm kind of caught in between there. But, 4.5 sounds just about right. This was truly an excellent time at the cinema. And that opening shot at the Enterprise, there are about 3 or 4 moments in this movie where I teared up, because when you're a Star Trek fan and you look at these particular characters and you see them being played by someone else, but when that person channels what you come to expect from McCoy, or what you come to expect from Scotty, or for what you come to expect from Kirk, and you see it done in a modern fashion, it's touching.